Well, I think this has been on the cards for a little while. The Islamic State, or Al Qaeda in Iraq, as it was popularly known before they renamed themselves, have been gaining strength in Syria. They've been carving out pretty big safe haven there. It seemed that they were attracting the majority of the foreign fighters and a lot of the money coming into the Syrian conflict, even though they weren't really fighting the Assad regime. They were more interested in taking territory and resources off other rebel groups. So they were a growing force over there. Meanwhile, since the US military pulled out of Iraq, then the Sunni Arab community there became increasingly disillusioned with the Maliki government, and violence was rising there. So it really gave them an opportunity to kind of rebuild their support base in Sunni communities. Um, and on the flip side of that is the weakness of the Iraqi military. I think everyone appreciated that they weren't that strong when the Americans left at the end of 2012. The senior officers recommended leaving a large mission there to carry on supporting and training them, but Maliki did not agree to that. And they seem to have gone downhill after from that point as well, with corruption increasing, Maliki parachuting in cronies into key positions, him splitting off the command, so he had direct command over the special forces and then a separate Baghdad operations command. They were suffered from intrinsic logistic problems where they can't really move many of their key units around the country. So it was a very undermined force in terms of its actual combat capabilities. As it's recently emerged, there were 50,000 ghost soldiers on the estimated 50,000 ghost soldiers on the payroll. So that's going to really undermine the strength of down to battalion level. So when the Islamic Offensive State began, these units just crumbled. They didn't have the officers weren't there. The officers told them to flee or surrender as best they can, and they were more concerned about their own personal safety than leading their men into combat. So it was a catastrophic collapse by the majority of four Iraqi army divisions, which really opened up the Sunni-dominated areas for the Islamic State to take control of. But at the same time, I think that'll probably transpire. That'll probably be one of the sort of classic intelligent failures to study. Why weren't they better prepared for this looming situation? From early August, we had the airstrikes begin, and initially they were just to defend US personnel in Erbil and defend the Yazidi minority stuck on Mount Sinjar. But that rapidly expanded to a campaign of airstrikes in support of Iraqi forces operating elsewhere in the country. More European countries have become involved, Canada, Australia, and then from September, the air campaign expanded into Syria with the support of various Arab states as well. So that has gone some way to sort of degrading, I would guess, the military capabilities of the Islamic State in terms of what they were developing as more formal military. And they now struggle to communicate, struggle to use tanks and other military hardware, which are easy to identify using airborne ISR assets. So they would struggle to mass their forces and hardware for major operations at this stage. That said, they're still being fairly effective. They've still been making a bit of ground in Al Anbar province, especially. Now that's been attributed to various factors, which including the sort of lack of boots on the ground to sort of call in direct air support, but also very strict rules of engagement to minimise collateral damage, which is probably a very good idea if you're operating in Sunni Arab areas, because you don't want to offend that population any more than they are already. But it's also probably very tricky. There's a lot of different kind of irregular forces operating on the ground at the moment. So to sort of try and work out who's who from the air, call that back to the operations centre, and then the Iraqis have got to work out who they have on the ground. That's probably a pretty complex process. So a lot of the aircraft that are flying out there are coming back with their weapons because they're not finding targets of opportunity that they can engage during their sorties. That said, the air campaign has always been billed as just one element of of the strategy, of a more holistic strategy to defeat the Islamic State. The other kind of key aspects really going forwards are going to be forming a Iraqi government that is capable of unifying the country. Now, there have been some steps made in that direction. Maliki has gone. The new guy, Haider al-Abadi, has formed a new cabinet. It includes a defense minister who is a Sunni Saddam-era Air Force officer, who apparently is well respected. So that's considered a step forwards. A lot of commanders have been sacked and presumably replaced by people who are considered to be more appropriate for the job. So Maliki's cronies are kind of being purged. That process needs to continue throughout the commands, and there's obviously going to be doubts about how, given the culture of corruption that pervades the Iraqi military, what you can really expect in the future. In my opinion, probably the best we can see over the coming years is a new culture where corruption is probably still widespread, but it becomes less acceptable when it gets to a level where combat operational effectiveness is seriously impaired. Together with that, the US is fleshing out a plan to train 9 Iraqi brigades and 3 Kurdish brigades, and these will be the guys who are basically reformed units that will lead the offensive against the Islamic State in the future. That's going to take many months, as far as I'm aware. It's still looking for setting up the training centres, getting the international training coalition together, etc. So that's really going to take quite a few months into 2015 until I think we still start seeing units emerge from that process. At the same time, there is a plan to establish a Sunni tribal force, which is essentially sounds like an attempt to reconstitute the Sons of Iraq militias that were so effective against Al-Qaeda in Iraq a few years back. So that's probably the quickest, easiest way of really taking it to the Islamic State in a way that you also have control of some sort of control of the Sunni community, because if you send majority Shia forces into Al-Anbar, for example, then you're probably going to get a bad reaction from the wider population. However, at the same time, if we're looking at what's going on here, you're training the Sunnis, you're training Shia majority forces, you're training Kurdish forces, so we're sort of seeing a situation where the US-led coalition will be encouraging the sort of centrifugal forces that sort of threaten to tear Iraq apart. And with that, at the same time, you have the Iranians mobilizing the Shia militias, who are really, in many respects, leading the fight on the ground against the Islamic State in many areas of the country. And in my opinion, that's a major issue, that the amount of influence the Iranians have over this situation at the moment is really problematic, because it's going to be very difficult to bring Sunnis on side and reconcile them with the government, which appears to be using pro-Iranian Shia militias extensively to suppress the extremists in what seems like a very sectarian conflict. Another problematic element we have is also the strategy for the Syrian situation, because as I explained, the Iraqi and Syrian situation are very, very linked. The Islamic State is pretty explicit about not recognizing that border in any shape or form, and they've been crossing it freely. So without addressing the Islamic State power base in Syria, what can you really, how much progress can you really make in Iraq at the same time? At this stage, the US is looking to ramp up the train and equip program for moderate Syrian rebels. I don't think vetting's begun yet. I'm not sure how many people they're going to find who are going to be acceptable and how effective they are going to be. I think there's potentially problems around asking them to just focus on the Islamic State rather than fight Assad, as they probably would prefer to be doing. At that stage, does Assad see the train and equip program as a direct threat and discontinue his tacit support for the international coalition airstrikes in his territory, which could be problematic. So yeah, there doesn't really seem to be a credible plan at this stage for really addressing the Islamic State power base in Syria. Some US officers have suggested that probably the best plan is to get the Iraqis to a stage where they can actually move to seal their border with Syria, thus sort of localizing the Islamic State situation on their side of the border. But sealing that border is something that the Americans really struggled to do for all the years that they were there. So I'm not sure how positive I would be about that emerging as a realistic possibility for 2015.